Hello, everybody, and welcome to Hexarchy. This is a really neat little combination of two of my favorite genres. It combines strategy, indeed, that very sort of similar 4X tile-based formula, with card building, with a deck building game. Take a look. I've got some gameplay in the background. If you want to check it out yourself, I believe it is currently in Kickstarter and available on a free demo on Steam. Let me tell you a little bit about it. What makes it special, what makes it tick, and a few things I'd like to see it improve on. First and foremost, let's just have a look at what we're actually dealing with here. You're thrown into a world with a settler and a deck of cards. Here you can see I'm playing as Egypt. There were a few different factions, a few different civilizations to choose from. I went with the Egyptians for that sweet, sweet humankind flavor. Hexarchy primes itself on being a relatively quick strategy game. It takes all of the things that we know and love. Here you can see, for example, a tech tree combined with the card building element. Really, really neat. It combines fun gameplay mechanics of civilization, right? Take a look at the map, the tiles. You can see here the wonders, God King, philosophy, monument. It also has units involved in the game as well, and these two are tied to the cards. You can see one of the cards in my hand is strength. I'm going to be playing a settler soon, or perhaps I'll choose this archer, who knows? Of course, there's a military element involved as well, as we seek to try and settle new cities, claim lands, resources. You get the deal. You'll see me throughout this also, of course, build tile improvements, send my scouts out to find things like holy sites, scouting new land, and here you can see building tile improvements, unlocking resources, technologies, etc., etc. It's a formula that is deep with 4X strategy as well. It's important to note. It has systems that I'll show you in a minute, including trade, culture. We've already looked at technologies. It also has a unit supply and promotion mechanic that is fueled by both the world itself through building roads and cities, but also the cards and promotions that are given out through the cards that you draw each turn. You're, of course, limited by your hammers as to how many cards you can play in a turn, and your cities, among other things, will produce those hammers for you. You can see over on the right-hand side as well, there's also gold, resources to trade, more on that in a minute. And overall, it paints, I think, a fairly intuitive 4X world, right? You can see by looking at it here, it's not overly complicated. The victory conditions are neat as well. At the start of each turn, you'll be fronted with a screen like this, telling you how you're pulling together your victory points. Through tiles, through population, maybe it's through wonders, holy sites, discoveries, that kind of thing. The trade system that I'm interacting with here is really wonderful as well. Here you can see I've traded for some food, and then I'm allocating that food to my cities to grow their population. It's a really neat way to manage those resources, and I think it adds to the overall flexibility and sort of fast-paced dynamic of Hexarchy, because that's another thing that this game really primes itself on. In fact, to quote its Steam description, it's really succinct. I love it. It just simply says, an epic 4X deck-building game in a 1-hour session. Play solo or online with up to 10 players. 2022, which is now. Now, the important thing to note here is that it is a fast-paced game. Here I'm playing on quick speed. The game will take me, I mucked around a bit, playing around with the mechanics. I reckon it would probably only take around half an hour to play a proper game on this speed, which therefore makes sense that it would take around an hour to complete a full session. I played in single player, however I was prompted to join some hot join multiplayer sessions throughout. I did quickly test with one, and it seemed to work totally fine. I had no issues with it whatsoever, but I will note that this review is largely focused on the single player elements. Here you can see I'm engaging in some combat, not so successfully, with my neighbor Mecca to the north. My units perhaps not as upskilled and strong as they should have been. I will talk a little bit more about the combat later in this video. It's something that I think is good, but could use a little bit of work to bring it to the fore and make it a little bit more usable. I found it to be an enjoyable system, but one that was a little bit clunky around the edges. But before I move on to talking about that, there are a couple of other elements to this game that I think we should discuss. First and foremost, you'll see the turn mechanics very clearly, obviously. We know and we love this from turn-based games. However, when it combines with the element of cards and deck building, it adds a whole new foray to your turns. You can take relatively quick turns, or you can do what I'm doing here, discard everything, try and min-max your resources, trade for extra things like food to add extra populations to your city, discard cards you're not using to try and pull more hammers and to try and get that one more movement, that one more placement, that extra road between empires. Here, later in the game, you can see I'm starting to earn more victory points. Turn limit 20 or 75 points is my end goal, and currently I am in first. I love the way that this game upfronts you that at the start or end of every turn. It really puts it in the forefront of your mind. This is my victory condition, and then you're prompted with your hand full of cards. Now, some of the resources that you trade for aren't just, say, putting food into a city to grow it, but instead they can be used to interact with cards in your hand. You can see the engineering card in my hand at the moment. I can play it with my 3 science that I've traded for. Neat. I can reduce the cost of my hammers to try and move forward to something like gunpowder as I move my way through the tech tree to try and strengthen these units as I head in for round 2 of combat with my opponent up to the north. I think the way that it brings the deck building, the card, I'm going to get absolutely flamed for my pronunciation of that word, throughout the gameplay is really unique. It is really fascinating. And as I move through here, into some of the later parts of this video, I'd like to highlight on some more critical pieces. And to be honest, they're actually few and far between. This game is only in Kickstarter. I see the developers did a live stream a couple of days ago. There was an alpha update also released a few days ago. They seem to be really active and onto it, particularly, of course, as their game is still in that Kickstarter phase. With the unit combat themselves, I did find it a little clunky maneuvering through. You can see here when there are multiple units on a tile, I'm fiddling a little bit, selecting between them, selecting their different actions. I want to highlight that this is partly a me issue and not an issue with the game, just to be clear. However, I think moving forward, the game could use from either maybe making units look more unique on the landscape. They all look very similar. It's hard for me to just cast my eyes and determine which is which, particularly as the UI sort of overlays over top of it. Other things that I was less clear about going into turns and out of turns was how the units were actually going to fight with each other, if there were any modifiers taking place, aside from the promotions that I'd already given them. Combat is sort of something that happens in this game in between turns. You trigger it to happen, and then in between turns it plays out. And there are many games that follow this mantra rather than having the combat play out in real time. And I think it makes sense for a fast-paced game like this that we wouldn't want players to be hung up on min-maxing every little movement. But it would be nice, I think, maybe, as the game moves forward and continues to develop out of its, to be fair, Alpha 0.4 version, to maybe upfront different things around how the fight might play out. When I move a unit and select an attack, for example, as I hover over my enemy, it would be nice to know the likely outcome that's going to play out at the end of the turn. Things like that. Looking at the world itself, though, it's hard to fault it. I think it delivers what it needs to do. Is it going to be a graphically complex, ultimately rendered, beautiful Humankind world? Maybe not quite to that level, but it doesn't need to be. This is a quick 4X deck building strategy game that somehow manages to lace in really interesting and nuanced systems of trade. Here again, you can see me distributing food out to the masses in my now 5-city-wide empire. And that's just one function as well. It's got a tech tree, it's got culture, it's got all of the things I think that 4X strategy gamers will love. It's for that reason that on whole, and when I reflect on Hexarchy as an experience, I can't really fault it too harshly. This is an enjoyable alpha Kickstarter 4X game that attempts to merge two somewhat similar genres into one. The deck building element doesn't add too much in the way of RNG. I didn't feel frustrated by it. It gave me flexibility to move militarily, science, culture, wonders, and everything else. I never felt limited by it, but I felt like it gave me nuance, particularly in these later turns of the game, where things start to get really spicy. Would I recommend you check out Hexarchy? Yes. And I'd finally, here at the end of this video, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you to the team behind it for dropping a code for me to try out, a beta test code in my inbox. I really, really appreciate it. And I had really fun time with this. I would enjoy streaming it in future perhaps, but man, we've got a big roster, so I won't make any promises. I do recommend you check out the demo at the very least, and I'll see you next time.